message. The message is called The Effects of David's Sin, the Absalom Spirit. And so this is, we talked about Bathsheba and David, and we talked about what a big deal that was last week. And so we were just going to kind of, let me read this here. It says, we spoke of David yielding his will to the spirit of lust and his adultery, maybe even rape of Bathsheba, the consequent murder of her husband Uriah, who was one of the 37 mighty men, the judgment of God that carried with it lingering effects that David carried with him for the rest of his life. He really did. And David was 39 when he committed this wicked, scandalous act that was likely shocking news throughout all Israel. Israel isn't all that big. And usually what happened in Israel pretty much traveled all over the country because they were all connected and everybody was, they were all supposed to be serving God and, the people of God, and it's a small place. And so when something happened, especially to the king or amongst the kingdom, it would get all over pretty fast, I would imagine. So this was probably shocking news. And at the time, David was 39 when he did this with Bathsheba. His firstborn son would have been 9 at the time. His oldest daughter, Tamar, would have been approximately 8 years old. And his second-born son was Absalom, and he was 7 at the time that David committed adultery with Bathsheba and consequently had her husband killed. So Amnon would have been 9, Tamar would have been 8, and then Absalom would have been 7 years old. So they were children, but they weren't so small that they didn't understand what they were hearing. Hi, Sue, I see you out there. And so they were children, but they were aware. And I'm sure they heard the chatter. I'm sure they heard the things that were being said about their dad and what he had done with Bathsheba. I'm sure that they heard all of the rumor mill and all the gossip mill and all the chatter and children playing and saying how I heard about your dad. And all these things, I'm sure, did come into the ears of Amnon, Tamar, and Absalom. And they were, I'm sure, very aware of it, to a certain extent, of what had happened with Dad and Bathsheba. Because then he wound up taking Bathsheba as his wife. So that was one of Dad's new brides here. So I'm sure that they were very aware of Bathsheba and very aware of the story behind it. So a couple of things I want to note is that David had 8 wives that we know for sure that are named in the Bible, and that he had 10 overall that we know for sure. There's some people I think that say he had as many as maybe 15 wives. He had a few concubines. I forget, maybe a couple. King Saul, and this isn't just a note to kind of as we unpack this thing, is that King Saul actually only had 1 wife and 1 concubine. And it was actually the way it was supposed to go, and according to the law of God, is that the king was only supposed to have 1 wife. So King Saul had 1 wife and 1 concubine, and then David wound up having 10 wives at least. And this may have in some way spoke to the fact that he had this lust spirit that he was fighting and that he had yielded to. So how's it going there, everybody? I see you guys. I see you, Tanette. So here we go. Let's go ahead and fast forward now. 50 years later is where we are. That's where we pick up the story that we're going to get into tonight. So at 50 years later, just to kind of bring you along with some simple math, David would have been 50 years old. Amnon would be 20. Tamar, his firstborn daughter, would have been 19. Absalom would have been 18. And Solomon, who winds up becoming the next king of Israel, was 9 years old at this point when this happens. And I'm going to go ahead and start reading here. 2 Samuel chapter 13. I'm going to read the first 14 chapters, and we're going to kind of unpack this a little bit. And I may preach just a little bit. So 2 Samuel 13, 1 through 14. After this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. And Amnon was so distressed over his sister Tamar that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it was improper for Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, and the son of Shemaiah, David's brother. And now Jonadab was a crafty man. And he said to him, "Why are you, the king's son, becoming thinner day after day? Will you not tell me?" And Amnon says, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." So this is his half-sister. So Jonadab says to him, he goes, "Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Please let my sister Tamar come and give me food and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down, pretended to be ill, and when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let Tamar, my sister, come and make some cakes for me in my sight, that I may eat from her hand." David sends to Tamar. She comes into her brother's house, prepares him food. So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he's lying down, and she took the flour, kneaded it, made the cakes in his sight, baked the cakes, and she put them on a pan. She brings them to him, and he refuses to eat. Amnon said, "Have everyone go out from me." And they went out from him. And then Amnon says to Tamar, "Bring the food into the bedroom that I may eat from your hand." And Tamar took the cakes which she had made, brought them to Amnon her brother in the bedroom. And now when she had brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her and said, "Come lie with me, my sister." But she answered him, "No, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing should be done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing." Verse 13. "And where could I take my shame? And as for you, you would be like one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." However, he would not heed her voice, and being stronger than she, he forced her and lay with her, which is a lot of words to say he raped her. So this is what happens here. So he goes ahead and he rapes his sister. The Bible says here that he had this, that he was distressed and that he was sick to his stomach, and he felt this way, and it was because he said that he loved Tamar. So Amnon was David's firstborn son. Amnon would have been a more popular name in Israel if he hadn't committed such a shameful act with his sister. Amnon struggled with the same lust demon as his father. Amnon would have been the heir to the throne of David, and he would have been because he was the firstborn son. So here is the heir to the throne, and the same demon that drove David to stay home from war and walk around on the roof, pretend he didn't know Bathsheba, got her pregnant, and had her husband murdered, is the same spirit that's at work, I believe, in Amnon's life here. So So Amnon is distressed. He's getting sick. He can't stop. He's obsessing about Tamar. He can't stop thinking about her. He wants to be with her, and he calls this love. He uses the word love to describe this feeling of feeling like he wants to be with her. She's a virgin. It's not right for him to do anything with her. So he's just distressed, and he can't even eat. He's sick to his stomach thinking about being with her because he can't. So it's important to understand that demons they can influence you and lie, but we always have a choice. We always have a choice to reject or yield ourselves to this spirit that was at work in this. And so it's important that we understand that part of it. Amnon considered the feelings that he had towards his half-sister Tamar to be love. He was distressed, sick to his stomach, but because he was unable to lie with her because she was a virgin and part of the royal family. But this is not love. This was a gripping, obsessive, driving compulsion to fulfill a fantasy or a mental image of an ultimate pleasure. So he had this obsession in his mind that he pictured being with Tamar as being this ultimate fantasy. There was this thing where it was in his mind, and he was thinking, this is going to be really thrilling. This is going to be a really fulfilling, ultimate level, ultimate pleasure fantasy that was in his mind that kept playing over and over and over and over. And he was obsessing. It was gripping his mind, gripping his imagination. It consumed his thoughts. It consumed his ability to even just have peace during the day because of the fact that he had this driving thing that was on his mind it was a driving compulsion, an obsession to have, and he had this fantasy or this mental image in his mind that kept playing on a loop in his mind, and it was controlling him, making him sick. He was sick to his stomach. He couldn't deal with the fact that he couldn't be with her, and he called this love, but this is not love. This was a spirit of lust that had taken hold and had gripped him. So much like David, this demonically charged fantasy drove Amnon to disregard and trivialize all of the glaring risks and consequences. Now think about it. David knew he knew that this was going to cause a rift. He knew this was going to cause division within the kingdom. He understood that Bathsheba's husband and father were both one of his 37 mighty men, that her grandfather was his advisor, was his chief advisor. And so they were connected, and he understood that this was going to cause a major rift within the kingdom when he did this. But the lust that grabbed hold of David caused him to do the unthinkable. It caused him to just lose all sight of reason. It caused him to just not even think about what was at risk. It's the same thing here with Amnon. This thing had so gripped him and so consumed him that it became a desperation to fulfill the fantasy. This is what happens when you are bound by a spirit of lust. When you are bound by a spirit, there is a driving compulsion to obey that thirst, to obey that bondage that's there. You are willing to obey that bondage to your own detriment. You are willing to obey this, even obey that thirst, to obey that thing that you are bound to above all sense of reason. People can tell you that this is, this is the risk that you're taking. This is but it doesn't matter. It's a driving compulsion because it's demonic. Because it's the flesh driven by demonic influence. And so this is what's going on. So this is what happens with Amnon. And he's tripping. Amnon, he's tripping. He's flat out tripping. So he gives himself over fully to this fantasy. He's willing to give it at all costs. He had to fulfill the fantasy. So much like a drug addict, like I said. Now Absalom's sister, she begs Amnon. She says, don't do this shameful thing. Don't take my virginity this way. See, she's not opposed to being his wife. She's not even opposed to this but she doesn't want him to rape her. She doesn't want him to just take it. She doesn't want it to be dishonorable. She wants it to be honorable. She wants to do the right thing before God. She's a godly woman with godly character. And she wants to do the right thing. And she's saying, look, Hannah, don't do this. This is going to change my whole life. Where would I hide from the shame? And you're going to be like one of the fools. Let's not do it this way. Just ask the king and he'll give me to you. You can have me. It's not that you can't have me. It's just you can't have me like this. She reasons with him. She tries to talk to him. That if he loved her, he would ask the father, and that she would give him to him, and she would have been given over to him. He ignores the consequences. He had to have her, and he takes what he wants. He rapes his sister and does what he feels like he wants to do. So Amnon risks it all to fulfill this fantasy and do these things. And it's unbelievable what he does. So anyway, let's move on. Let's go on to the story, because actually I want to make sure that I get into the Absalom part of this, which is really good. So 2 Samuel 13, 15 through 19. So these 4 verses. Then Amnon's response is he hated her exceedingly. Now he gets what he wanted. He gets to fulfill the fantasy. Seldom is the reality of a thing as good as this built-up thing in the mind of what's going on, this compulsion that this lust has triggered, that's driving this fantasy in his mind. So then he fulfills what he thinks is the fantasy that he's got to fulfill based on this driving thing that this demon is on his mind to do. And then afterwards, Amnon hates her exceedingly, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he loved her. And Amnon says to her, arise and be gone. Verse 16. So she said to him, no, indeed, this evil of sending me away is worse than the other thing you did to me. But he would not listen to her. He calls the servant who attended him and said, here, put this woman out away from me. Now she's this woman that needs to be thrown out. She doesn't matter to him anymore. And now he hates her. He feels hatred towards her more than the driving compulsion that he felt before. So he drives her out, throws her out, and he locked the door behind her. She has this robe of many colors, which was representative of the virgin daughter of the king, that they would wear such a thing, and that the servant put her out, bolted the door behind her, and then Tamar put ashes on her head. She tore her robe of many colors that was on her and laid her hand on her head, and she went away crying bitterly. So he rapes his sister, dishonors her in the name of love. This is what he calls love. He loves her. So he dishonors her, rapes her, and afterwards he realizes, see, this is the thing. It's not so much that he hated Tamar, it's the fact that he hated himself. It was a self-loathing because he understood that this was evil. He understood this was wicked. He understood this was selfish and dark. He understood what he had done was absolutely horrible. And he hated himself for it. He hated the fact that he was now a rapist that was capable of raping his virgin sister, and that he wasn't going to be able to escape what he had just done to himself. He had allowed himself to get caught in this imagination, this fantasy. He allowed himself to be caught up in this whole thing, and he was driven by it, compulsive. It was something that compelled him to do it. Then he goes and does it, and he actually does it, and now he hates himself for it. And now what has he done to her? He tells her to get out. He doesn't want to face her anymore, because what he did was horrible. It was wicked, and he broke her heart, and he knows he changed her life forever. He disgraced her and dishonored her, and he probably hated him, and he hated himself for doing it. He just wanted her to get away from him because he didn't want to look at her, because it was going to remind him of what he'd done and what he is, which is a rapist. So he tells her to get out, and she's like, please don't do this. You steal my virginity, you take my virginity, you rape me, and now you just throw me out like I don't matter. His second thing you're doing is worse than the first thing you did. He stole everything from her and threw her out like she had no value. She leaves his presence, puts ashes on her head. She tears her beautiful robe that represented that she was a godly virgin daughter of the king. And she wept bitterly, because now she knew that her life was not going to be the same, that the pathway of her life was not going to be this pathway of honor, that she was going to be this virgin bride that was going to marry somebody probably of prominence at some point, a godly man, and that she would be in this place of honor. And he stole it from her, all in the name of love, because he said he loved her and he had to have her. It was lust. It was the spirit of lust. It was the same spirit that David yielded to. So here comes Absalom. 2 Samuel 13, 20 through 22. Absalom, her brother, says to her, has Amnon, your brother, been with you? And now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this thing to heart. So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. But when King David heard of all these things, he was angry. Very angry, the Bible says. Absalom spoke to his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister. So here comes Amnon. He sees his sister. Absalom sees his sister. She's grieving and what she's dealing with. And he tries to console her, tells her it's going to be all right. I imagine that Absalom assumed that as soon as their dad David found out what Amnon had done, that David was going to do something about it. And this thing would not be left unaccounted for. That Amnon, what he had done to Tamar, was definitely going to be something that David would be grieved over, and that he would deal harshly with the firstborn son Amnon. So Absalom tries to console her a little bit, and he was so angry he couldn't even speak to Amnon. He wouldn't talk to him, good or bad. He couldn't even talk to him. He was so gripped with it. And then she comes and she has to come live with him. She has to come live with him because now she's in hiding. Because now she's no longer the virgin daughter of the king. So now she's in hiding. And so Absalom she lives there with him for a couple of years. So a couple of years go by, and this is what's going on. So he's very angry. David gets very angry, but he doesn't punish Amnon. He doesn't punish him. He doesn't do anything actually about it. He leaves Amnon alone. He's mad at him. Maybe he yells at him. Maybe he tells him off. But there's no actual consequences that take place with Amnon. So this is one of the things that makes you want to think, okay, so what is it about the fact that Amnon rapes his sister and David, he doesn't punish him? It makes you wonder, did he rape Bathsheba? Did he feel like that Amnon was guilty of the same crime that he had done? Did he look at Amnon and feel guilty about perhaps punishing Amnon for the same exact thing that he had done 11 years earlier? Was David reluctant to deal with this situation because he had to face his own self? He had to face his own things that he had done? Why did he leave Amnon unpunished? Well, he did. He did, and he didn't do anything about it. So 2 years go by. Tamar's been living in Absalom's house, and he gets a chance to see over 2 years exactly how Tamar's life plays out. And he gets to see their life has been completely changed and altered by that day that Amnon decided to take what he wanted. Absalom watched it for 2 years, sat there and watched how her life transpired, and he had a good idea on how Tamar's life was going to play out. So 2 years later, it came to pass, Absalom had some sheep shearers in Baal-Hazor in 2 Samuel 13, and he goes and he invites all the king's sons. I'm going to kind of try to skip through this a little bit. He says to the king, let all the king's the king's sons come and help me. It's time to shear the sheep. And he asked for his son, and David says he can't go. And he says, well, why don't you go ahead and let Amnon come with us? And the king says, well, why should he go with you? Verse 19. And he said, and so, here we are. Sorry, verse 27. And Absalom urged him, so he lets Amnon go with the king's sons. And Absalom had commanded his servants, now watch now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, when I say to you, strike Amnon, then you kill him. Do not be afraid. Have I not commanded you, be courageous and valiant? So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each one got on his mule and fled. Absalom was wounded. Absalom was angry. Absalom he had allowed a root of bitterness to fully be established in his soul. He expected that his dad, David, was going to do something about what happened with Amnon. He didn't do it. He sat there for 2 years, gave his dad time to deal with Amnon. The anger, the frustration of David not dealing with it, the hurt of seeing his sister in this situation, watching it day after day for 2 years. He just watched this whole thing transpire. Finally, he had had enough, and he decides to kill his oldest brother. In 2 Samuel 13, the second part of verse 32, he says, for by the command of Absalom, this had been determined from the day that he forced his sister Tamar. Absalom had decided that he was going to kill his brother. I mean, unless David had done something about it, he was going to kill his brother. He had made this decision 2 years. It took him 2 years to come to the point where he just wasn't going to wait any longer. After 2 years, he saw his sister's life was where it was, and he saw that everyone else just seemed to turn the page. Everybody else just seemed to continue on, and life just went on, and Amnon got to continue to live life as it was, and Amnon gets to be, he's still the heir to the kingdom. He's still going to be the next king. Everything is fine. He got to ruin his sister's life and have no consequences. All the king's sons return after Amnon's murder. And there's a lot of reading, but I want you all to get this. So it was, as soon as he had finished speaking, the king's sons indeed came, and they lifted up their voice, and they wept. And the king and all his servants wept bitterly. But Absalom fled, went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur, and David mourned for his son every day. So Absalom fled, went to Geshur, and was there for 3 years. King David longed to go to Absalom, for he had been comforted concerning Amnon because he was dead. He wanted to go see Amnon, but he didn't go do it. So what are we talking about here? So David weeps. I mean, this is what I was talking about. This is the part of the price that he's paying for the sin that he committed with Bathsheba. That God said that the sword would not leave his house. That he would constantly be at war, and that there would be division even within his own home, within his own house. And this is the division that took place. So now Amnon does the same thing David did. David doesn't have the courage to deal with it and deal with what needed to happen and actually discipline Amnon and deal with what he had done to Tamar. He didn't do it. He just left it undealt with. Since he left it undealt with, Absalom takes it into his own hands and kills Amnon. David's heart is broken. Now he's lost his son. This is now his second son that he's lost. So he's weeping. He weeps for him every single day. It broke his heart. All of the king's sons got together and they wept loud and they wept bitterly. This was their brother, and he was dead. The house of David was having to mourn because of this. This is part of the repercussions of David's sin. So Absalom takes off. He's gone for another 3 years. So he's waited 2 years for David to do something about Amnon. Doesn't do it. Now he's in hiding for 3 years. David felt inside like he wanted to go do something and go get Absalom, but he never actually went to go find him. So here they are. So they're gone. He's in flesh. He's in this place, Geshur, for 3 years. And he goes in for 3 years, and he longs to see his son, but he reaches out finally. And he allows Absalom to return home after 3 years. 2 Samuel 14, 23 and 24. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him return to his own house, but do not let him see my face. Now this is really important. I understand there's a lot of groundwork, but this is really important. So Absalom returns to his own house, and he did not see the king's face. So here he watches, and he's expecting justice from his dad for 2 years. He goes into hiding, and he's thinking to himself, David should have done something about this. Dad should have took care of Amnon. And he should have dealt with this situation. Dad failed us. So he's upset. So then he takes matters into his own hands. He takes off, and he's expecting that David will go take off after him. I mean, after all, he raped my sister, and all was good. When I go into hiding, I kill my oldest brother, and you don't come see me? You don't understand, and it's justified what I did to Amnon. You don't understand why I did this to Amnon, what he did to my sister, and you don't come find me. You don't come and get me. You don't welcome me back to Jerusalem. So for 5 years, he's questioning David's judgment. For 5 years, he feels a disconnection from his father. For 5 years, he feels like, where is Dad? And why is Dad not being a father to me? Why does he not care about me? Why does he not care about Tamar? Why doesn't he care about our sister? What's wrong with us? So this is where things are at. So now it's been 5 years since Absalom he's been dealing with this unjustness. It's now been 3 years since he's seen his dad. Has not seen his face. He comes back, and now he's been in Jerusalem for another 2 years. And still, David has refused to come see Absalom. So now it's been 7 years since Amnon raped Tamar. And it's been 5 years since Absalom has seen his father's face. He has not seen his dad's face or heard his father's voice in 5 years. So finally, what he does is he's been there for 2 years. So what he does is he winds up setting fire. What he winds up doing is setting fire to Joab's field to make Joab have to come to his house. And he goes, look, man, I've been back here for 2 years. I haven't seen my dad's face. What's going on? If this is the way things are going to be, why am I even back in Jerusalem? I haven't seen my dad in 5 years. I don't understand. He feels abandoned by his dad. He feels like his dad doesn't matter. He doesn't see him, that he doesn't have value. He didn't do anything about Tamar being raped. He hasn't seen his dad in 5 years. He's seeing that there's a pattern here where David just doesn't seem to care about him, doesn't seem to care about Tamar. He doesn't know what it is. What is it about us? Maybe we have the wrong mom. Maybe what is it about us that you don't care about us? You got to understand how the Absalom spirit takes root. You got to understand how you get to a place where you are an Absalom. So something switches. So finally, here's chapter 14, 32 and 33. Absalom answers Joab, and he says, look, I sent to you, saying, come here, so that I may send you to the king to say, why have I come to Geshur? It would be better for me to still be there if I'm not going to see my dad. He said, now therefore, let me see the king's face. If there's iniquity in me, let him execute me. So Joab went to the king and told him. And when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king. The king bowed his face to the ground he bowed his face before the king, and the king kisses him. It's not, he doesn't come and embrace him. They don't have some loving embrace where he comes and he hugs his son and, hey, I love you, I missed you, come on back. You're welcome at the table. You're welcome to come to the king's table and sit with your brothers. No, none of that. He gave him a kiss. It was uneventful. It wasn't this big deal what he was hoping for. He hadn't seen his dad in 5 years. Everything just seems to be a big disconnect. He's not feeling the love. He feels completely disconnected and alienated. But this is an important thing to see here. So now it's been 7 years. He's questioning the heart of the father. He likely feels rejected and unwanted by his dad. He's questioning if they even matter to David. He's not seen his dad in 5 years. He couldn't take it being shut out anymore. The pain of the rejection was too great. It was so bad that David says to him, look, if you see iniquity in me, then execute me. He's saying, look, I can't take this anymore. If you're going to keep shutting me out and treating me like I don't matter and pushing me away and saying that I don't have any value, then just execute me. If there's iniquity found in me, then just kill me already. Put me out of my misery. But he'd gone to this point, the ache of being rejected, the ache of being pushed away, of not feeling like he mattered, it was too great for him. He's like, man, just either welcome me home or kill me. But this is too much. Where's my dad? He hasn't felt fathered in a long time. And the whole time he's got to be thinking, you know, Dad, you make bad decisions. I heard about what you did with Bathsheba. You do some pretty bad things. You had somebody killed, yet you're still the king. I killed my brother because he rapes my sister and I can't come home. You don't do anything about what happened with my sister? The rejection, questioning whether or not you matter. It was too great. It weighed on him. So finally he forces the issue. He stands before his father and he just gives him a kiss. He's not welcomed back into the king's table. He's not welcomed back where he should be. He's not taken back in his rightful place. Nothing to it. From that point on, something switches in the heart of Absalom. Absalom has decided that he's no longer going to try to get the approval of his father. Absalom has decided that he's angry, he's bitter, he's been rejected, he's hurt, he's made up his mind that Dad just doesn't care about me, I don't matter, Tamar doesn't matter, we don't matter. I'm just going to accept that that's where things are at. He was bitter, he had unforgiveness in his heart, felt rejected, he was angry, he was wounded, he was cut to the heart. Dad's not being a dad. I can't count on my dad to be a father. I can't count on him to watch over us. I can't count on him to protect my sister. I can't count on Dad. This is a spirit of rejection. And I posted this on Facebook the other day, and I'm going to read it out for you. This is what a spirit of rejection, this is what it provokes on the inside of the heart of somebody. Feelings of fear or abandonment. Anger as a defense mechanism. Addictions like alcohol, drugs, gambling. You feel offended or embarrassed if criticized or corrected. You feel self-pity. You see your situation as all bad. You don't see any of the good in your life. An orphan spirit. You sabotage relationships. You have no mentors. You attack others. You're rarely vulnerable. You have internal demons and emotional triggers that are loud internally. And you have attention seeking. You're trying to prove, there's a need there to achieve greatness, to prove that you are valuable, that you do matter, that there is something of equity, something of value in you, because obviously the people that you needed to tell you that or show you that or make you believe that didn't do it. Strong depression, despair, even a suicidal spirit or a spirit of death, deciding that you don't even care if you live anymore. An Absalom spirit is hurt, wounded, and feels rejected. Their self-worth is decimated, and they resent the one that rejected them. This resentment is turned into a driving desire to hurt the person that wouldn't validate them and prove to the world that they matter and that they actually are more capable than the person that they perceived rejected them. So they go out on a mission to prove their worth, and then they want to hurt the person that rejected them, and they want to prove that they are better than them, that they are more capable, that there's more greatness inside of them, and they go after proving this thing because they have been rejected. 2 Samuel chapter 15, 1 through 6. After this had happened, that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men, and to run before him. Now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was that whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is from such and such place." And Absalom would say, "Look, your case is good and right, but there's no deputy of the king to see you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made the judge in the land. Oh, that I was the one to make the judgments here. Everyone that would have a lawsuit or a suit could come and cause could come to me, and then I would give him justice." And so it was that whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand, take him, and kiss him. And in this manner Absalom acted towards all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So he took, this was a 4-year process, by the way. So he did this for 4 years. Every single day he goes out there and he wins the hearts of the people. He tells them whatever he needs to tell them. He shares with them, "Oh, I'm sorry, but there's nobody here to hear your case. If I were in charge, I would make sure that this was taken care of properly." This is the way Absalom, but he goes about it, he's diligent. It's every day, he's driven. There's a driven, inborn desire. That spirit of rejection is driving him to prove. Every day he's able to wake up and go out there and do this all day long to win the hearts of the people, because he's angry, he's rejected, he's hurt, and he's got something to prove. Because all of his self-esteem is riding on this thing right here. He's proving to the world that he matters. "Hey, Dad, look at me. Hey, Dad, look here. I matter. I'm a big deal too. Maybe I'm a bigger deal than you are, Dad. Hey, look." Spirit of Absalom was developed out of the spirit of offense, a bitter root of unforgiveness, that no one cared about him or Tamar. So the handsome Absalom wins the hearts of the people by speaking to their sense of need for justice. So he's speaking to their need for justice. These people are coming to Israel. They're looking for justice. They're looking for somebody to give them a righteous judgment. They need somebody to take care of this. They're outraged. Perhaps they're angry. Perhaps they're upset because they've been done wrong, and they're coming to look for justice from the people, from the king's table, from the king's palace there, that they would make a righteous decision and give them the justice that they need to move forward, and that things would be taken care of for what they consider to be an injustice that was taking place in their own lives. So they feel like something has happened to them. Something unjust has happened to them. They're coming to the king's house to get justice, and Absalom speaks to their need for justice, because see, Absalom understands them. Because Absalom understands what it's like to not have justice. Absalom understands what it's like to want justice, to feel like that somebody should intervene and do the right thing. And I'm sure that Absalom had a great story to tell. I'm sure it was conviction. He was able to say, "Look, the king doesn't care about justice. The king doesn't worry about, the only thing the king cares about is what he wants. The king doesn't care about justice. The king doesn't care about what's right or the equity of a decision here. He's not going to care about you. He's not going to care about these kind of things. He didn't even care about my sister. He didn't care about me." That's what the king is like. The king is not just. So I'm sure he told a compelling story. I'm sure he sounded really, really compelling. And I'm sure he spoke with conviction to each and every person that came to the gates. Because in his own heart, his heart was bleeding, wounded, broken, rejected, and it came out from that deep reservoir of rejection, that root of bitterness, that hurt, that wound, that reality in his own mind that he had been rejected, that he didn't matter, and that the king was unjust, that David was an unjust man, and he was an unjust father, and he just didn't care. So I'm sure he retold this story over and over and over again with this orphan spirit that he now carried within him. Absalom carried that wound for his father for 7 years. For 7 years, he looked to his dad to take care of and do what was right. For 7 years, he expected his father to do what was righteous. And he felt like his father didn't do it. That his dad failed them. He wasn't there when they needed him. And for 4 years, Absalom slowly turns the hearts of the people towards him of Jerusalem. So after 4 years, Absalom makes his power move. So we're going to go into his power move. This will pretty much be the end of the message here. At this point, David is 61 years old. Tamar is 30, Absalom's 29, and Solomon's 20 years old. 2 Samuel chapter 15, 13 through 17. Now a messenger comes to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. And so David says to his servants, who are with him at Jerusalem? And he said, let us flee. Arise and let us flee, for we shall not escape Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us, and strike this city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servant said to the king, we are your servants, ready to do what you want, what the king commands. And the king went out with all of his household after him, and the king left 10 women, concubines, and to keep the house. And the king went out with all the people after him, and then he stops at the outskirts. So here we are. This is David. David stops at the outskirts. So he's running from Absalom. He realizes that a lot of people in Jerusalem love his son. And he realized when he made his power play to take the kingdom from his dad, he needed to flee. So here's the king. David is the anointed one of Israel, that God himself anointed him to be the king of Israel. He's now leaving Jerusalem to get away from his son, who's made a power play to take the kingdom from his dad. So he's leaving. All the people are leaving with him to get out of Jerusalem, to get away from Absalom. And he stops at the outskirts of the city. So he's being driven out, like I said. He gets to the edge of the city, and you can only imagine what David's thinking. You can only imagine it. You know, what kind of things were going through his mind? You know, thinking about all that he's gone through, thinking about what he did with Bathsheba. Was it worth it? I'm sure he's looking at his life and he's wondering, and he's running from his son. He's thinking to himself that he knows that this is part of the judgment of God. When God spoke through the prophet Nathan and told him that there was going to be division in his household. And he knew as he stood at the outskirts and he looked back at Jerusalem, and he'd been driven from his own kingdom by his own son. It had to have hit him. Wow, what a price I'm paying for this. Wow, what a price I've paid. That's a lot to really carry. You've lost 2 sons that have died, and now you have a son that's trying to snatch the kingdom from you. You have to run from your own son. You're 61 years old. And this thing that you did way back when you were 39 years old, 22 years ago, that thing's still carrying with it lingering effects that you're sitting here and as he gets older, at 61 years old, he's looking and he's going, man, this thing's still dogging me. What he did was horrible, it was evil, it was wicked, and it stayed. He was reaping what he sowed still. 2 Samuel 15:30. So David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went up. And he had his head covered and he went barefoot, and all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up weeping as they went up. So David wept as he left Israel. What a surreal moment of heartbreak. The people followed him and they also wept. David's getting tired. He's been fighting his whole life, waging war after war after war. He lost 2 sons. He's wept over his sons. Now he's got another son, and this son's trying to take the kingdom. He's being driven out. He's 61 years old. And David was a sensitive guy. He felt deeply, cared deeply, worshiped deeply. And he's weeping. And he's weeping so much so that the people that are following, they're weeping too. He's crying. It's breaking his heart. It's getting to... Have you ever been to that point where you've been strong for a long time? And you've been strong. I mean, you've carried a lot for quite a long time. And you've endured this hardship and that hardship and this hardship. And you've endured some stuff, man, where people are like, how did you stand through all that? How did you just continue through and all that? And then you get to this one thing. It's just, there's this thing that just kind of just becomes the, I'm tired. I'm tired, man. I don't want to do another one of these seasons. I can't do this one more time. I just can't endure another season like this. I just can't. Man, I've done this so many times, and I've stood and believed God, so I can't do this again. I don't want to do this again. And you weep because it's just too much. And the people see their king weeping. He's being driven away. He's leaving Israel. He's an older man now. And the people follow him, and they're all weeping. And Absalom comes to Jerusalem to reign, and his father took off. He's fleeing. So David's trying to rally his people, and he's trying to retake the kingdom. After a little while, finally David gets the gumption, starts to do what he does. Starts to get everybody going. This is what you do. You go do this. He starts trying to navigate because he's wise and he understands how to navigate these situations. So he's moving people around. You do this, you do that. Go do this. He starts trying to operate under the wisdom of God that's on him, the anointing that's on him to lead the country, the nation of Israel. And he begins to try to do that. Even as he's emotional, I'm sure he's still fighting the emotion. I'm sure he's still fighting through the feelings that he's feeling. But he just begins to operate as he does because he's got a mind for this and a wisdom to rule the kingdom. So he begins to tell people what to do and move things around. 2 Samuel chapter 18, we're going to do the second part of verse 2 through 5. And the king says to the people, I also will surely go out to you myself, he says. But the people answer and say, no, you shall not go out, for if we flee away, they will not care about us, nor if half of us die will they care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us now, for you are now more help to us in the city. So David says to the people that are with him, he says, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by the hundreds and by the thousands. And now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, deal gently with my son Absalom, the young man Absalom, my son, for my sake. And all the people heard the king give the captain these orders concerning Absalom. So here's an interesting thing. David was a leader. The one thing that you can appreciate about a leader is a leader who weighs what's right, does what he feels is right, that he actually absolutely has the conviction that is righteous, and he makes a decision that he believes is what's righteous, and he doesn't feel the need to vacillate and appease everybody, that he just leads the people. That's what he was called to do, that he was anointed by God to lead the people. But here he is now, all of a sudden, this was one of the sins that actually caused Saul to lose the kingship, was that he deferred to the people and cared about the people. David was not one of those. David was one that did what God told him to do. He sought the heart of God. He heard the voice of God. He consulted with the Lord, built an altar before the Lord and said, God, do I overtake them or do I stay here? God, do I go and recover all? God, speak to my life and I will do what you say, God. This is what David has always led this way. But he's broken. He's in despair. He's in hopelessness. He's not in Jerusalem anymore. He's been displaced. And he's in grief. And he's in this place where he's tired. And he's not thinking the same. And he's not in this place of confidence. He's lost his legs, aren't under him anymore. His confidence and his strength, the passion of knowing where he is and knowing who he is and knowing that he's the king anointed by God. He's lost it. He's struggling around. He's struggling through it. He's feeling emotional. He's telling the guy, hey, look, be easy on my kid. Don't let him, if you see Absalom, don't hurt him. He's just a young man. Don't, be easy on him. And he's feeling emotional. And he's not okay. He's not feeling this strong play. He doesn't want to go to war with his son. He doesn't want to kill his son. He doesn't want to lose a third son. He doesn't want to do this. David doesn't want to be in this position. And he doesn't know what to do. And he's feeling emotional. He's feeling broken. He's tired. And he defers to the people. They say, don't go out with us. He says, I'm going to go to war with you guys. I'm going to go to battle. I'll be with you. And the people say, no, king, you stay here. And he goes, well, whatever you guys think, that's what I'll do. That's not how David ran the kingdom. That's not how David ruled as a king. He didn't do that, defer to other people, well, whatever y'all think. That's not how David did things. David was a leader, a strong leader. He heard God and he did what God told him to do, and it didn't matter what anybody thought about it. He didn't take the time to find out what God said to say. He was hurt, he was wounded, he was in an emotional state, and he just deferred to the people. Well, whatever you guys think, that's okay. Just don't hurt my son, he says. Couldn't bear the thought of losing another son. He knew that he was in judgment. He knew that everything that was happening because of what he did with Bathsheba. He knew he was paying a price for something that he had done. And he just felt like he was in this place where there was nothing he could do about it. He just had to take it. So, this is a psalm. This is a portion of a psalm. It's Psalms 3 that he wrote while he was fleeing from Absalom. This is chapter 3, verses 3 through 6. And he says, "But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory and the one who lifts my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice," verse 4, "and he heard me from his holy hill," Selah. Verse 5, "And I lay down and I slept, and I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around." David was in a state of grief, and he cries out to the Lord, and then he lays down and he goes to sleep. I imagine that he pretty much cried himself to sleep, that he was in despair, he was hurt, he felt hopeless, and he just cried out to God and said, "God, this is where we are. God, help me. I don't know what to do here. I don't know what to say, but God, he cried out to God, and he says that I laid down and I went to sleep. But I woke up, and the Lord had sustained me, and something happened when he woke up in the morning that he felt like, I'm not afraid. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that come against me." Something happened in the sleep, in the nighttime, where God sustained him and quickened his spirit and renewed his vision and his vigor. And he awoken with his legs under him, awoken with some strength, awoken, remembering who he was as the king. And so he began to maybe get a little stronger and rise up and not just buckle underneath of the weight of everything that was going on. So then God delivers Absalom into their hands. I don't know if you know the story or not, but they saw Absalom hanging in a terebinth tree, 2 Samuel 18. Let me go ahead and just kind of skip for the sake of time here. And then Joab goes. He finds Absalom stuck in the terebinth tree. He says, "I can no longer linger with you." And he took 3 spears out of his hand and he thrust them into Absalom's heart, verse 14. And that he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And then 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom. They struck him and they killed him. So Joab blew the trumpet. The people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab held back the people. And they took Absalom, cast him into a large pit in the woods, and they laid a very large heap of stones over him. And then all of Israel fled, and everyone went to his tent. Then Joab did what was needed to be done, but he knew David would not have the heart to do. This needed to happen. Absalom needed to be killed. Absalom had to be taken out. I understand, I know I preached on the whole rejection thing, and I know David mishandled that situation, absolutely mishandled that situation, and he caused rejection in his own son's heart, and his son rebelled against him and all that, but he had to deal with this. This had to be dealt with, and sometimes you need some help making the right decisions when your emotions are involved. 2 Samuel 18:33, then the king was deeply moved, and he went to the chamber over the gate, and he wept after he finds out that Absalom was dead. He goes to the gate, and he weeps, and as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place, oh Absalom, my son, my son." David had lost a 3rd son. He was deeply moved and wept. The heartache was so great that he wished he could have died in his son's place. He continues to grieve even after this. He weeps some more. Even once he goes back to Jerusalem, he continues to weep and mourn his son Absalom. And it gets to the point where it becomes a friction between him and Joab. He's like, look, man. He goes, you need to stop crying about your son. I understand that he's your son, but you got to get up and tell everybody that has stayed with you and stuck with you that you care about them, that they stood with you when their lives were on the line. It's time for you. He tried to take the kingdom from you. Wake up. So Joab was trying to be a good friend to David. But David was so brokenhearted, he lost it. He was in that place of he just lost it. You know, where you just couldn't handle it anymore. This was the judgment of God. This is part of what happened when he decided to stay home in the spring and not go out and wage war when it's the season for the kings to go out and wage war. And he allowed himself to get into lust, stay in lust, and do the most horrific thing that he did. Because he did this thing, he paid a price. And as an old man at 61 years old, he's weeping, brokenhearted. He's lost 3 sons. He's waged war his whole life. And this is too much. And this is what we need to understand. And I want to also go back to the Absalom thing. We need to understand with Absalom, we've got to understand that the spirit of Absalom is the spirit of rejection. It is wounds that people experience when pastors reject and hurt people, when you don't have fathers in the faith that embrace other people to come along, that embrace the giftings and the gift sets of other people, and are secure in their own call and their own anointing and their own gifting to bring people forward and to help the sons and daughters of God become who it is that they've been called to be. And instead, there's a hurt that takes place. This happens in the church. This happens in families. This happens in every different dynamic when there's somebody who they look to that person to be the person to tell them, validate them, that they have value, that they matter, and that they don't get that from the people that they think they should get it from. They're not getting it from the church. They're not getting it from leaders. They're not getting it from anybody. And they get upset. They get angry. And they feel rejected, and there's this wound, and there's an offense there. It turns into a root of bitterness, and that's where you get a spirit of Absalom. A spirit of Absalom is coming from brokenness, from rejection, from really it's an orphan spirit, and it happens even within the church where pastors are not, because it's important to them to be the main person. They don't want to bring people up. They don't want to bring people. And these types of things happen in churches all over the country, all over the place. We have called people, gifted people that are anointed by God to do something for God. And instead of being embraced and loved and welcomed and helped to grow and flourish into what it is that they're supposed to do or what's supposed to be, instead, they're not fathered in the faith. They're not mothered in the faith. They're not taken care of the way they should be. Perhaps they started off at home. Dad wasn't in the house, or their relationship with their dad was horrible. Then they go to the church and they're looking for the pastor to father them. And the pastor reinforces the same feelings that their dad did when they were a kid. And then there's this reinforced feeling of bitterness. That's where the spirit of Absalom comes from. And we need to understand that forgiveness, love, agape love, a willingness to heal, a willingness to bring health, a willingness to speak into someone's life, a willingness to love and embrace, a willingness to heal wounds that you didn't make, a willingness to embrace people and love people and see them through and see the wounds in their soul healed and restored, and to actually father or mother people that actually hadn't had that before. Heal those wounds. Help them get to a place of forgiveness and releasing spirits of rejection, releasing the spirit of these bitter roots and letting these bitter roots could be plucked out because you make a choice to forgive. These are things that can happen in the church. These are things that God wants to do. Our Father wants to do. This is why agape love is so important in the church, that it be selfless, that leaders are selfless. The Bible says that he who would be greatest among you shall be your servant. We're supposed to serve the church and love the church and be servants. If you're so called and we're so anointed and so articulate and so powerful at communicating the words and the oracles of truth, then there should also be about us a humility and a love and a willingness to serve other people and love other people and bring them along and do the things that need to be done in the kingdom. Sometimes your fruit is not going to be seen. Sometimes the things that you do are going to only be seen by God. Sometimes the things that we do when we serve the kingdom are only going to be recognized by God. But they'll make a difference in somebody's life like there's no tomorrow. We can actually heal. You can circumvent the spirit of Absalom things happening. You know, it's an epidemic in the church. And I know I've gone way over, but this is an epidemic in the church of church splits. Where churches just split up because you got somebody that's in the church that's hurt, they're wounded, they feel rejected, they feel like they don't matter, and they decide they're going to make themselves matter. They're going to rise up and they're going to matter, and they're going to show somebody else that they matter. And the way that they do that, and they lie to themselves about the why and the motive and all that, but they're doing it because they want to prove that they matter. And these are the types of things that happen. So I'm just saying we can heal that, we can fix that, and we should do that. All right, so amen. So let's just go ahead and pray. I know I went way over, guys. My voice is a little... Father, I just give you praise. Lord, I thank you that you are good and that you are merciful. I thank you, Lord God, that you bring light into our hearts, that your word is a light unto our path, God. Lord, I pray, God, that you would speak to the hearts of those, God, Lord, that have watched all or part of this message, God, and I pray that you would quicken their spirit. I pray that you would bring health to their hearts. I pray that you would restore. I pray that you would heal wounds over their hearts, God. Wounds that have happened, wounds and scars, Lord, and I pray that you would uproot, God, bitter roots out of people's hearts. That there would be a spirit of forgiveness that would sweep through, God, and heal the church. Lord, I pray, God, that you would uproot those things, that your healing virtue, your life spring, would run right over our souls and right over our hearts. And that you would restore and renew and heal. And that godly confidence would just come, and strength would just wash over our souls. And that you would heal all of those wounds and all of that dysfunction, God, and bring us forward in you, God. Lord, I pray, Father, over your church, God, and I pray that there would be a forgiving spirit, a unifying spirit, a spirit of agape love that would fill our churches, God, and fill. Lord, I pray, God, that you would just have your way, God. Lord, in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. You guys have a very, very, very blessed evening. I thank you guys for being troopers and sticking with me. I think I went over an hour, and so I just bless you guys. Thank you for watching. Have a blessed night.